Spyder, CFL's red zone. Spyder, here comes Spyder, CFL's red zone. Well, here you at a CFL game live 2019, and at the 107th grade Cup in Calgary, chanting loud in the red zone. Want to hear you chanting loud. We want Spyders, CFL's red zone. Spyder, here comes Spyder, CFL's red zone. Spyder, here comes Spyder, CFL's red zone. In the red zone.
Bang! How you doing? Spyder's back! That was a different intro, wasn't it? In the red zone. Anyway, I'm back. Sorry, I gotta kick this banner out. Spyder's real cool. Here you go. Hey! And a real jewel. Hey! High-powered offensive tool. High-powered offensive tool. Hey! Super exciting new CFL rule. In the red zone. Not the dead zone. Whew! Spiders old school. Yeah, not old school. I'll stop it at that. And that's the problem. And that's why I'm here and I'm back. And I know there's been a reason to come back. CFL, XFL talks and so forth. And I definitely want my opinion on that. And by the way, that song I wrote about my Spyder CFL Red Zone rule was about chanting loud in the red zone. Like the banner, you probably didn't see that I was going to take the touchdown Atlantic. We want Spyder CFL Red Zone rule. That hopefully will happen someday, but it depends on a lot of things here. What's going to transpire with the CFL XFL talks and with the CFL during this pandemic. So as you see, I still have the old camera and I'm totally authentic here. All the nostalgia. This is no like green screen in the back. This is totally authentic nostalgia paraphernalia, all the CFL stuff and so forth. So here I am, I'm back, and I'm glad I'm back, and we got to get right into the session because I'm going to do two sessions. I'm going to need to do two sessions. Okay, happy Easter Monday, but let's get right into it, okay? I'm going to be putting this up on YouTube, and it's going to be a titled Spyder CFL Red Zone Rule Needed by the CFL and the XFL to Preserve Our Three-Down Game. And in relation to the CFL XFL talks, and I've been saying this in many videos before, sessions before, that why the CFL is in trouble and in a decline in popularity and so forth, because it's been too old school, too long, and they're not willing to acknowledge that they need to change, okay? And that's been the problem, okay? And in relation to the XFL, the CFL cannot bow to the XFL and bend over. Seriously, they can't because it's going to be four-down football, and I can guarantee you, if that happens, which a lot of people predict it will, they're selling out. And the XFL, regardless of Rock, I mean, you know, everybody likes Rock. I mean, I'm from Nova Scotia. Halifax, he's from Nova Scotia, his father, and you know, he's Canadian. So he went to the States, U.S. college football, and then came to the CFL and was on the Stampeders, and Wally Brownell released him on the practice rides. Then he became a famous wrestler and now a movie star. But the thing is, Nick McMahon was very rich and WWF and WWE and so forth. He couldn't make a go of it, and he brought it back and it folded too. And then they blame it on the pandemic. They probably would have kept going, but how long they would have last? Okay, you're competing with an empire, the NFL. Okay, and look at 100+ million, billion TV contract. I mean, they're a force, they're an empire, and you don't go head on with them and compete with them with 4-down football. You just don't do it. So the CFL has to convince the XFL to play with 3-down football, but they need to make 3-down football even more different and more exciting. And there comes in and how you do that's with my rule, my super exciting, tailor-made for CFL 3-down football, Spyder CFL Red Zone rule. And I'm going to get into that a little later and tell you why. It's a perfect fit for both leagues to merge, and then they'd have a product, and then they'd be able to compete with the NFL. I can guarantee you, because they have a different product and a more exciting product than we have now with in the CFL. Okay, and I'll explain that as well and why as well coming up. It'll probably end up in my second session, but let's get back to this session here. Okay. I went over that. Okay, the CFL, things they have to do, they have to change, okay? Themselves, they have to change, first and foremost, okay? And then merge with the XFL, but with 3-down football and with my Spyder CFL Red Zone rule. Then they'll have a product, okay? And I'll elaborate on that, the importance of that later. In relation to the sports people or people in general, there are 3 kinds, okay? There's the pessimistic person, there's the optimistic person, and there's a realist. I'm a realist. And then there's opinion, the truth, and facts to back up that truth. So the CFL has to acknowledge, first of all, that their competition is the NFL. And if the CFL and the XFL merge, their competition is the NFL. Okay? The CFL has to acknowledge it. They never acknowledged it. They won't admit that. And they get being gobbled up by the NFL. And because they haven't changed. They've been old school and they haven't changed their Canadian ratio. And they have to realize that they're in a highly competitive sports market today. Okay? It's not yesterday. It's today. And it's highly competitive. And they have to change with the times. Okay? The old school Canadian ratio is stale, and it needs to go. Okay, I mean, if it was so needed, then why don't the NHL, the NFL, Major League Baseball, NBA, and yes, even MLS soccer have it? MLS soccer doesn't have it. But you have to start guaranteed. You have to start seven nationals or Canadians. Now it's 10, by the way, which is unbelievable. And if it's a global player takes a position. A starting position in the CFL now, they take a Canadian, American starting position, not a Canadian guaranteed starting position. That's even worse. Okay, but I just want to, there's something I wanted to play for you that on the Canadian ratio, which needs to change. It needs to go, really. And the Canadian players would be a lot more respected if they were to make a team on merit, okay? Rather than just be handed a starting or roster spot in the CFL, roster spot in the CFL or starting spot guaranteed because of their passport. And why would they want to? I would be embarrassed if I was on the field because of my passport and I wasn't even good enough to play in the CFL, and I was only there because of the Canadian ratio and my Canadian passport. I'd be embarrassed. I wouldn't even accept it. So this is what's happening in the CFL, and you can't have a professional football league like that. You can't have any professional sports league like that. Okay? You got to allow the best available players to start and play at every position for an entire CFL game, just like the NHL does, the NFL does, Major League Baseball, NBA, and yes, even MLS soccer. It has to happen. And that's why the CFL are dying. It's dying. Okay, I just want to play something here Dave Naylor said about the Canadian ratio.
When are we going to start the 2021 season? But
okay, just take listen.
Everybody's thinking about the future, obviously.
Dave, another huge part of Canadian football and the identity of the CFL is Canadian players. And I realize this is so early, and I'm basically asking you to speculate here, but the future of Canadian players in the CFL, a ratio rule, do you have any sense as to whether that would be maintained even on CFL teams? And of course, we saw before when the league went into the States, it was an unbalanced playing field. We all remember that Baltimore Stallions team, but just thoughts on the Canadian players' future in the CFL based on this announcement.
I cannot imagine a fully integrated league where there are 20 Canadians on every team and 7 starters mandated. I know the league survived that for a couple of years in the last era. Of course, that was Canadian rules, which gave the Canadian players an advantage. Also, the fact that every U.S. team hired a former NFL or former USFL coach, except Baltimore, gave them an advantage. So they had advantage on the sidelines, and they had the advantage in the strategy of the game. I think that was going to become an issue very quickly had the U.S. expansion teams not folded at the end of the '95 season. And frankly, the economics improve for the owners if you don't have a ratio. That Canadian offensive lineman that you paid $225,000 to, you can replace for $75,000 with an American. That's because of the laws of economics, supply and demand. Canadian players cost you more. So if you're looking to adjust your economics to be viable in a post-COVID universe, it's a lot easier to field the team with mostly Americans than it is with a ratio, just from an economic standpoint. And look, I think that you could have a developmental element. You may have some spots on the roster for Canadians, but I couldn't see the full thing. And again, I'll just throw a bit of a counterintuitive thing, okay? The CFL ratio comes from an era before you and I were born, when Canadians could not realistically compete with Americans in football. If you did not have a ratio, you were not going to have Canadians on the field. Now, they still dwarf us in terms of numbers. But let's just talk about what's happening on the other side of the border right now. There's Canadians in the NFL. There's Canadians in college football. There's an SEC football game between Tennessee and Alabama this year that had 2 starting receivers, not just from Canada, from the same town. From the Brampton Minor Football Association, like an SEC showdown. So, if Canadians can compete on that side of the border, why can't they compete on this side of the border? Well, the answer is they can. And I guess the question would be, in what numbers can they? Can they 20 per team? No. Can they in smaller numbers? I think legitimately so. I think to some degree, you could argue the ratio is a bit outdated in that sense, but I know there are people that love to see Canadians on the field, and it's a very important game, and they feel like it's important for the development of the sport. Look, if you like seeing Canadians on the field, I can't tell you that's not important to you, right? That's important to you. But here's the argument we're going to hear, okay, Hustler? If you get rid of the ratio, grassroots football in this country will die. Kids will stop playing it because they have nothing to dream for. Okay. Let's destroy that myth right now. Ready? Where's the ratio in the NBA and the NCAA basketball? Doesn't exist. Not one. Where is it in baseball? Not one. Where is it in NCAA football? All these leagues where it doesn't exist, Canadians are aspiring to get to. And I'll go back to what I said earlier about all these Canadians in the NCAA. None of them, I've never heard an elite Canadian football player tell me he started playing the game because he knew there was a ratio in the CFL and he could get on one of those ratios. I've never heard that. Maybe there are guys, but when I'm talking to, whether it's Chuba Hubbard or a Joe or Josh Palmer or Eamon Ogbamiga, I just named off 4 of the most elite guys in college football right now, some of them are upcoming to the NFL draft. None of those guys will tell you that the CFL and its ratio had anything to do with their football dreams. Now, if they don't make it in the NFL or college football, they'll gladly wrap their arms around the flag in the 3-down game and do like other players have done. But I've known guys who won most outstanding Canadian in this league who told me they never watched 3-down football until they played in the league.
Yeah, well, I think it's true, and it speaks to kind of the ups and downs of the CFL over the course of the last 30 years. Even in my lifetime as a football fan, there's been some times where it seems like the CFL has had momentum, and then there's been other...
Okay. So true. And the thing is, what's so ludicrous about this is that the CIS, University Football, youth sports in Canada. All they talk about is like, oh, the Canadian players that down the the U.S. college, playing U.S. college football. There's 800 and some schools down there. There's like 27 in Canada, you know? And they go on about that, and they go on about, oh, they're being drafted by the NFL, the top Canadian players, and they can freely go. There's no restrictions, okay? But why, in a professional sports league, why does the CFL allow them, the Canadian Players Association, which is made up of mostly guaranteed Canadian racial alignment and Canadian players, allow them to dictate to the CFL and to the CFL coaches and GMs and owners who starts and plays in supposedly a professional football league? When you're competing with all these other professional football sports leagues, like Dave Naylor says, that don't have a ridiculous old school Canadian ratio or ratio. It's insane. It's ludicrous. But yet they handcuff and control and dictate to the CFL who starts and plays with a Canadian ratio and their Canadian passport. They are basically running the CFL and the CIS. They're in on it too. Oh, they'd cry wolf if they get rid of the Canadian ratio, but it's true. Dave Naylor's right. When I did my survey, okay, when I came up with my CFL Red Arm Bowl, I surveyed a lot of CIS players, and they said they look down to see if they don't even watch to see if they want to play in the NFL. They don't even watch the CFL. But yet the CFL is being controlled by them and the Canadian Players Association with their Canadian ratio, and basically destroying the CFL. It's killing the CFL. You got to allow the best available players to start and play at every position, okay? In any league, and in the CFL, okay? The Canadian ratio, it's got to go. It's got to go, because it's not selling CFL 3-down football, and it hasn't been for a long time, and it's been killing our game, and we're losing popularity to the NFL because of it. I just wrote a few notes here. Changes, yeah. The thing is, the CFL, you have to be able to listen, to learn, to seek out the truth and the facts and the true reality, okay, and acknowledge, okay. You have to acknowledge the truth, you know, and address it and make necessary changes to be successful. Something the CFL has not done and failed on miserably, okay. Changes the CFL did make that were necessary to be made, that cost the CFL dearly. Okay? And here's other changes that CFL need to make, okay? They can't be pushed around. The Canadian sports media not covering the CFL, including TSN reporters and Bell, the Grey Cup not being on CFL on CTV. Okay? This is this TSN having exclusive rights for all the CFL games in the Grey Cup. They don't even show it. They own CTV. They don't even show it on CTV. People that don't have cable? Come on. Maybe with the CFL and XFL merged, if they merged, depending on the season, they'd allow the Grey Cup to be aired on CTV, but I don't even know about that. But the CFL has to change that, and that should never stand. CBC always had it, okay? When they carried when cable came in, when they carried the Grey Cup, it was always on CBC with rabbit ears, or okay, anybody that didn't have cable. The CFL, who allows the TSN, okay, owned by Bell, to exclusively to cover all the games. I'm saying this again, should demand that the Grey Cup is aired on CTV, owned by Bell Media, who owns the Toronto Argonauts. I'm part of a CFL team. And they have the rights for all the games. Exclusive rights for all the CFL games. TSN, owned by Bell. This is crazy. The CFL also, in their contracts, should demand respect, and that TSN and any of their reporters and sports shows on TV and radio need to hype and positively promote and push the CFL and consistently cover the CFL like they do the NFL, which they don't. So they're hypocrites. Can you imagine owning the Toronto Argonauts, having exclusive rights for the CFL, Bell Alliance, and they don't even do this. Anything they run it down, they don't even cover it. The CFL and the owners need to finally run their own three-down football league, not the Canadian Players Association, made up of mostly Canadian players and guaranteed Canadian linemen. The CFL can no longer allow the Canadian players and their association, Canadian Association, Players Association, to dictate to the CFL and their teams who starts and plays in the CFL, with their controlling, handcuffing, guaranteed, huge, unrealistic, and unattainable Canadian roster ratio and their guaranteed Canadian starter ratio. Come on, this has to change. The CFL can no longer embarrassingly allow any Canadian players to start and play in the CFL when it's obvious they have no business being on the CFL field, and they're only there because of their Canadian passport and their guaranteed, dictating, handcuffing Canadian ratio. And this is what's killing the CFL and why people aren't watching it. It's not respected, and it's looked at as second rate. And minor league football, you can't have that in a professional league. The CFL and the Canadian players who actually want to play in the CFL and not the NFL would be a lot more respected, like I said earlier, if they all had to actually make a CFL team, like the American players have to in the CFL. Okay? And make it on merit and on talent, and not make it because they're a Canadian passport and their guaranteed Canadian ratio. This is crazy, ludicrous. Look, John Cornish came in the league. He didn't need a Canadian. They developed him. Look, he was a running back. They developed him into a running back too. He was good enough, and he earned a spot on merit. Okay, okay, there was a Canadian ratio there, but still, that's not how they developed him. They put him on the practice route. They developed him. They brought him along. It took 2 or 3 years before he became a starting running back in the CFL. That's the way every Canadian player that's good enough that should be drafted. That's the way it should happen. Not with a guaranteed Canadian ratio that gets them on the roster and their passport and gets them a starting spot when they haven't even earned it. This is just ludicrous. It's ridiculous. And by the way, going on about the top Canadian players playing in the NFL, how does that help the CFL? Well, it doesn't. It helps the NFL. The Ottawa Red Blacks coach, Dickinson, said, his brother, Dave Dickinson's brother, said, there's 24 and counting and more top Canadian players playing in the NFL now, and every year there's more. He says, how does that help the CFL? That's a whole team. That's a whole CFL team. Top Canadian players playing in the NFL when there's a guaranteed Canadian ratio that needs to be filled. This is insane. It's insane. And it's why the CFL's in trouble. Big trouble. Because if they got to talk to the XFL that's went out of business, basically 3 times, or even 3 times, it could be the 3rd time it goes out of business. Like, they got to be in dire straits, and they are. The pandemic didn't help it, but they were hurt. Look, BC, nobody in the stands. Toronto, nobody in the stands. Montreal practically folded, had to be bought again with horrible numbers. They lost like $20 million plus. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. The 1-year contracts too. But the CFL dug their own grave on this. They dug their own hole, and they deserve to be in where they are as a league. They deserve it. 1-year contracts need to go too. You imagine 30 free agents, okay? That's 30 plus free agents every year on the CFL team. Okay, that kind of movement on the CFL team is killing the CFL. The CFL players and the Canadian Players Association, again, are only looking out for their best interests, not the fans, CFL fans, or the health of the CFL, okay, or the survival of the CFL. This and the Canadian ratio is killing the CFL and killing the fan support and fan base in the CFL, and any new fans that they're ever gonna attract to the CFL. The CFL needs to admit and acknowledge that the NFL is their main competition. I said this earlier. It needs to acknowledge that, okay, that the sports market they need, that they don't have, is the NFL, NHL, NBA, Major League Baseball, MLS soccer. Those major sports, that major sports market in Canada, those fans, those major sports fans, the CFL, they don't have, that they need. And I mean, I'm talking, that's the majority of the sports market in Canada is that market. Not the CFL are basically staying alive in old school, older, loyal CFL fans that are slowly diminishing. They're diminishing. They're because the CFL will not change. So they can't possibly grow their fan base or grow their league. The CFL needs to realize that they are in a highly competitive sports market, world and market today, and need to change with it. The CFL needs to acknowledge that they are really selling entertainment and excitement, and that's where my super exciting, tailor-made for CFL 3-down football, Spyder CFL Red Zone Rule becomes such an important component and such an important tool, not only for the CFL, but it's perfect now for both the CFL and the XFL and Emerge, that would preserve our CFL 3-down game and distinguish the CFL and the XFL as one league and Emerge from the NFL, if they were to merge, of course, from the NFL, which is the only way that they can compete with the NFL, because they need to be different and better in downs. The third down, imagine, third down in football versus the fourth down in football. And the only way this can be done is with my super exciting, superb Spyder CFL Red Zone Rule that will take our CFL 3-down game to a whole new level and put a real signature on our 3-down game and make our third down the most innovative and most dramatic and most entertaining and most exciting football down that's being our third down in professional football. My Spyder CFL Red Zone Rule is a winner and naturally tailor-made for CFL 3-down football and perfectly suited for the CFL and XFL merger. And it's so true. This is so true. And that's perfect timing because we're getting ready to time out. And I'm going to be back for my next session. And I'll go over the importance of the CFL adopting my Spyder CFL Red Zone Rule for and to have it a huge selling feature to sell the new XFL and CFL merge as one league if they were to do that. Signing off. See you for the next session. Take care. Spyder. Here comes Spyder CFL Red Zone Rule.